What happens when a group of city kids mock the quiet, jungle boy from the province? They laugh at his survival gear and laugh even harder when he warns them about the storm. But when disaster strikes and panic sets in, who will they turn to for help? James, the one they mocked, is the only one who knows how to survive. Can he save them all? Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. James Cruz, a young man from a small village in Quezon province, had just moved to Makati, the bustling heart of the Philippines. The contrast was overwhelming: the towering skyscrapers, the hum of traffic, and the constant movement of people. Back home, he was surrounded by nature's calm, fresh air, and the quiet beauty of the province. But now, in Makati, everything felt fast and cold, and James couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't belong. As he stepped into his new classroom at Makati National High School, the stares were immediate. He was out of place here: his simple clothes, his unpolished manner, and most noticeably, the old survival bag slung over his shoulder. It was a stark reminder of his roots in the province, far from the well-dressed students who filled the room. His heart raced as he found his seat, but the moment was cut short by a loud, mocking voice. "Hey, look at this," Liam Navarro, the tallest and most prominent student, called out. "What's this? A jungle boy?" Liam's friends burst into laughter. James, already on edge, gripped his backpack straps tightly. He knew exactly what was coming. Liam and his group were known for making fun of anyone they saw as different. Liam didn't stop there. He strode up to James's desk, grinning. "Did you bring your survival kit with you? You planning to live in the jungle or something?" With one swift motion, he grabbed the bag and dumped its contents onto the floor. Out spilled a bamboo fire starter, fishing line, a small foldable bolo knife wrapped in cloth, and dried camote chips. The class erupted in laughter. "What is this, some sort of apocalypse kit?" One of the girls giggled. Liam held up the fire starter, flipping it in his hands as if it were a toy. "Seriously? Who even uses this? Lighters are a thing now, you know." James remained calm. He could feel the sting of their laughter, but he refused to let it show. His grandfather had always told him that true strength wasn't about fighting back with words or actions. It was knowing when to walk away. He quietly began to gather the scattered items, ignoring the snickers from the group. "Oops, guess that's dinner for tonight, huh, jungle boy?" Liam taunted, crushing the chips beneath his shoe. James clenched his fists but stayed silent. Instead, he calmly packed his bag, slung it over his shoulder, and walked out of the classroom, leaving behind the mocking laughter. Outside, away from the noise, James found a quiet spot in the courtyard. He took a deep breath. His hands were shaking, but he steadied himself. He wasn't weak. He knew that. His survival skills, the very things they mocked, would soon prove their worth. They just didn't realize it yet. The bell rang, signaling the start of a new school day. James Cruz, sitting at the back of the classroom, glanced around at his new classmates. The energy in the room was different from what he was used to back in his small village in Quezon. The city was fast-paced, and everyone seemed to have an opinion about someone from the provinces. James didn't mind the stares. He had grown up learning to be strong in silence. But deep inside, he couldn't shake the feeling that the city kids would never understand him. As Mrs. Santiago, their teacher, stood up to make an announcement, the chatter in the classroom slowly died down. She was always cheerful, and today her enthusiasm was impossible to miss. "All right, class, listen up," Mrs. Santiago began. "This weekend, we're going on a 3-day camping trip to Calagua's Island. It'll be a chance to test your survival skills." The classroom erupted with excitement. Calagua's Island, known for its pristine beauty and lack of modern amenities, was a far cry from the city's comforts. There would be no electricity, no Wi-Fi, and no gadgets. It was the kind of place where only the essentials would matter: food, shelter, and water. James felt a surge of excitement. This was his element. Growing up in the province, he had spent countless hours learning survival skills from his grandfather. For James, this wasn't just a camping trip. It was a chance to prove that survival wasn't about technology or luxury. It was about the knowledge passed down through generations. But not everyone was thrilled. Liam Navarro, the class clown and one of the most popular kids in school, immediately spoke up. "Wait, survive without Wi-Fi," Liam chuckled loudly, making sure everyone heard. "Some of you won't last a day. How are we supposed to live like this?" His friends laughed along, the sound filling the room. Liam and his group were used to the comforts of city life, and the idea of spending time without their phones or internet was a joke to them. James kept quiet, but his grip on the desk tightened. He knew what Liam was thinking. He had already been branded as the Jungle Boy because of his survival bag, and now Liam was just continuing the mockery. But James wasn't going to engage in the banter. Instead, he kept his focus on what was to come. "Hey, Jungle Boy," Liam called out, grinning. "Think you can teach us how to make fire without a lighter? Or maybe catch fish with your hands like a caveman?" The class laughed again, but James stayed calm. He had heard it all before. His grandfather always told him that real strength wasn't about reacting to mockery. It was about knowing when to stay quiet and let your skills speak for themselves. Mrs. Santiago, unaware of the tension in the room, continued with the details of the trip. "This trip will involve learning to survive in the wild without modern tools. Each group will be responsible for their shelter, fire, and food. You'll have to work together and rely on your instincts." James felt a quiet satisfaction. This was his chance to show them all what real survival was about. "And James," Mrs. Santiago added, "since you have experience, I'm putting you in charge of one of the groups. You'll lead your team in the survival tasks." The room went silent. James wasn't looking for recognition, but he knew this would be his moment. He would show them all that survival wasn't just a joke. The boat ride to Calagua's island felt like an adventure to James. As the boat cut through the waves, he watched the island grow closer with each passing moment. The island was untouched, wild, and beautiful, a paradise far removed from the chaos of Makati. For James, this was a return to something familiar. The fast-paced city life with its skyscrapers and distractions had always felt foreign to him. But here, on the island, he felt a connection to the land, to the way his grandfather had taught him to survive in nature. When they docked, the students began disembarking, their eyes wide with excitement. The island was exactly as James had imagined, raw and untamed with no signs of modern civilization. James, however, wasn't distracted by the beauty of the place. He immediately took charge as he knew survival on the island would require preparation. The first task was setting up camp, and James quickly chose a spot near the trees. He knew that the trees would provide some protection from the wind, which could pick up unexpectedly. James began securing the tents, driving stakes into the ground and tying them down with ropes. He worked efficiently, staying focused on the task at hand. Liam Navarro, however, was having a different kind of fun. He immediately pulled out a volleyball and began tossing it back and forth with his friends. They laughed and joked, their carefree attitude clashing with the urgency of the situation. James glanced at them, frustration bubbling inside him. This wasn't a vacation. This was a survival challenge. They needed to prepare, but they were too busy playing games. Despite the distractions, James continued his work. He gathered firewood, carefully selecting dry branches to use for their fire, and arranged them in a fire pit. He even found a small stream nearby and began purifying water using the filtration system his grandfather had taught him. It wasn't the most sophisticated method, but it worked. As he worked, James felt at home. This was where he thrived, using his hands, his mind, and his knowledge to survive in the wilderness. However, as the day wore on, James began to notice a change in the air. The wind was picking up and the sky was slowly darkening. James, trained to read the signs of nature, could feel something coming. The temperature had dropped, and the clouds to the east were growing thick and heavy. James couldn't shake the feeling that a storm was imminent. He had learned from his grandfather to trust his instincts in situations like this. He walked over to Mrs. Santiago, who was chatting with a few students by the fire. "Ma'am," James said, trying to keep his voice steady, "I think a storm is coming, a bad one." Mrs. Santiago looked up at him, smiling. "Oh, don't worry, James. The forecast didn't say anything about a storm. It's probably just a light shower. We'll be fine." James hesitated but didn't push the issue. He had warned her, and now it was up to him to prepare. He went back to work, reinforcing the tents and securing the group's belongings. The wind continued to pick up speed, and James could feel the pressure in the air. He knew the storm was approaching fast. Suddenly, the first raindrops fell. They quickly turned into a downpour, soaking everything in sight. The wind howled as the rain battered the ground. James could hear the trees creaking under the pressure, and he knew the storm wasn't going to be a passing shower. It was growing more intense by the second. The students who had been playing earlier were now scrambling to protect their things. The tents that had been hastily set up were already beginning to rip apart. James's heart raced as he looked around at the chaos. Liam and his friends, who had been laughing just moments before, were now frantically trying to secure their belongings, but they were too slow. James took charge. "Get to higher ground. Move now," he shouted over the wind, his voice firm and commanding. "We need to leave the beach before it gets worse." The students hesitated, some still unsure about the severity of the storm. Liam, clearly in disbelief, stared at James. "It's just rain, James. What's the big deal?" James didn't waste time arguing. He grabbed Liam by the arm, pulling him toward the cliffs on the other side of the beach. "Follow me and move fast," James shouted. Liam, seeing the seriousness in James's eyes, reluctantly followed. The rest of the group began to stumble behind, their feet slipping in the mud as the rain poured down. The storm was worsening, and the waves had grown higher, crashing violently against the shore. They finally reached a small cave James had noticed earlier, just as the storm reached its peak. The winds howled and the rain lashed at the entrance to the cave, but they were safe. The group huddled together, soaked and cold but alive. James stood at the entrance for a moment, watching the storm rage outside. This was survival, relying on instinct, knowledge, and preparation. As the storm raged on, James felt a quiet sense of relief. They had made it through, but he knew this was only the beginning. The others would now see that survival wasn't about being comfortable or playing games. It was about staying calm, being prepared, and using what you had to stay alive. The storm, which had started as a simple downpour, quickly escalated into something much more dangerous. James watched, heart pounding, as the wind whipped through the trees and the rain battered the ground. The once calm sea now roared with crashing waves, and the sky darkened with ominous clouds. This wasn't just a passing shower. It was a full-fledged typhoon, and James knew they had to act fast. "Get to higher ground, now," he shouted over the roar of the storm, pushing the students ahead of him. They scrambled up the muddy path, but the wind and rain made it difficult to keep moving. James felt a knot of anxiety in his stomach. He had been prepared for challenges on the island, but not this. The storm was fiercer than he anticipated. As the group struggled to stay together, James's eyes scanned the area, looking for the cave he had spotted earlier. That cave was their only chance for shelter from the storm. Suddenly, the loud crash of wood splintering reached his ears. He turned to see Mrs. Santiago, the teacher, lying motionless under a fallen branch. Her body was pinned to the ground, blood trickling from her forehead. Panic spread through the students and James rushed to her side. "Mrs. Santiago," James shouted, his heart racing. He checked for a pulse and breathed a sigh of relief. She was still alive, though unconscious and injured. The teacher wouldn't be able to lead them through the storm. It was up to James now. "Stay calm," James called to the others. "We're heading to the cave. Follow me." With Mrs. Santiago's injured form in his arms, James led the group through the increasingly brutal storm. The rain lashed at them, and the winds howled, pushing them back with each step. But James's determination drove him forward, his instincts honed from years of learning survival skills. After what seemed like an eternity, they finally reached the cave. James helped Mrs. Santiago inside and made sure the rest of the group followed. The cave was small but offered shelter from the storm's fury. They huddled together, cold and shaken but alive. James immediately took charge. He gathered dry twigs and leaves to start a fire. His grandfather had taught him how to start fires in harsh conditions, and within minutes, the fire crackled to life. The warmth of the flames was a relief to everyone, and James quickly moved to the next task. He purified water using banana leaves, showing the students how to make a natural filter from the leaves. As they drank, James tended to Mrs. Santiago's wound, applying pressure to stop the bleeding. His hands moved quickly and efficiently, his mind focused on keeping everyone alive. Liam, who had mocked James earlier, now sat quietly by the fire, his gaze fixed on James. He had witnessed the calmness and skill James had shown, and he couldn't deny the truth anymore. James was the only one who knew what to do. "I didn't know you were this capable," Liam admitted, his voice softer than before. "I thought you were just the jungle boy." James didn't respond immediately. There was no need. The storm outside raged on, but inside the cave they were safe for now. And James knew that as long as they followed his lead, they would make it through. As the storm finally began to subside, the students slowly emerged from the cave, their clothes soaked and their bodies exhausted. The rain had turned into a light drizzle, but the damage left behind was undeniable. The island, once peaceful and serene, was now a scene of devastation. Trees had been uprooted and the tents were torn apart by the ferocious winds. The beach, once pristine, was littered with debris. James looked around, taking in the wreckage, but his mind was calm. His priority was to ensure everyone was okay. The rescue team arrived shortly afterward, helicopters hovering overhead. The students, one by one, were helped into the helicopters and flown to safety. James watched silently as his classmates were treated by paramedics, their faces filled with gratitude. He could see that they had realized, too late, that survival wasn't just about having the latest gadgets. It was about knowledge, resilience, and staying calm when everything around you was falling apart. Back at school, life resumed as normal. But there was a shift in the way people looked at James. The students who had once mocked him now avoided the teasing. There was no longer any laughter when his name was mentioned. Instead, there were whispers of respect. James didn't seek attention or praise. He was just glad everyone had made it through. One afternoon, as James sat at his desk packing his books, he was surprised to hear footsteps approach. He turned to see Liam standing in front of him, his expression different from before. "Hey, James," Liam began, his voice softer than it had ever been. "I just wanted to thank you for everything. You really saved us." James looked up at him and nodded. "My grandfather taught me how to survive. I just did what he taught me," he replied quietly. Liam nodded, his face now serious and respectful. He gave a small, appreciative smile before turning away, leaving James to pack his things. For the first time, Liam understood what it meant to rely on true survival skills, and he couldn't help but respect James for showing them the way. James' story teaches us that true strength isn't about proving ourselves to others. It's about wisdom, patience, and knowing when to help those around us. In times of crisis, it's not the loudest or strongest who lead, but those with the knowledge and calm to guide others through hardship. The skills James learned from his grandfather weren't just for surviving the wilderness. They were life lessons. Sometimes, the challenges we face today are only conquerable by remembering the lessons of the past. The past shapes our future, and through wisdom, we find the strength to overcome anything,